Welcome to Draw Process. I'm Ike, and I'll be drawing page 62 of episode 2 of my comic First Sun and Sword today, and I'll share my thoughts along the way. Okay, thanks for joining me, and I hope I can teach you some things and share my experience in a way that helps you with yours. What we have here in these rough pencils, remember these are my roughs, these are my layouts or my thumbnails. They're done right onto the board so that I can capture those gestures immediately. So I'm trying to capture something kind of challenging. I want Farah, this woman here with the spear, to be just having gotten up in a deep squat, kind of falling backwards, but at the same time swinging her her spear forwards. So she's kind of thrusting the spear, twisting her torso, leaning back. I want her center of mass off, like it looks like she's about to fall. She's not super balanced right now. And I want it to look like Kurok is charging at her, but slightly to her side, because she's leaning off to the side. So he's kind of charging through her. That's pretty specific. My comics, I try to be very physical with the movements of the characters and capturing it, because I want you, the reader, to have a clear and easy to follow sense of movement of what happens between each panel. So in the prior page, the last time we saw her, she is on the ground. So somehow she got up, but she's not going to be perfectly well standing yet. So I need continuity. And then in this next panel, as this big lizard man charges past her, we see her on her shoulders, having fallen, kind of rolling backwards, like maybe he bumped into her some. So showing her in the first panel here with her balance off will naturally follow to her next physical position. If I didn't put the effort in on those things, it may not flow. You may not be able to fill in the gaps, animate it in your mind as easily. And in a way, you could call that continuity. And then that next set of 3 panels, we've got a sword with a arrow drawn or just starting to be launched out. We see an arrow or two hitting Kurok as he's charging at Sword, who's still in the cart. Remember, his foot's messed up. And then in this shot, we've got a nice, clear picture of, and you could call this establishing shot, of Sword still aiming the bow and arrow. He's still attacking. And Sun just behind him tugging on the rope. So we're getting a check-in on that piece of information, that piece of action going on. What I called it last time was kind of like lines of plot. You know, there's ABC. One was Kurok and Farah fighting, the other Sword with his bow doing his thing, and then what Sun is doing, and each one is in a slightly different location, and they have their own set of continuity of sequence between the actions that I need to capture, and I need to keep going back and forth between them. That adds complexity, obviously, versus a comic where there's only one thing happening. Maybe there's only 2 characters fighting, and that's it. Much less to track and go back and forth between. So Sword is warning Sun about the dangerous situation, catching his attention. So we have him turning, quite frozen in fear as he sees Kurok charging. And I'm playing with how much of a panel to show. I've got his head pretty large. We don't need to see his entire mouth or jaw, but I really want to capture those eyes of fear. And I wanted him off. He's not level So again, tracking with this kind of continuity of helping you fill in the motion here, he's pulling on, this rope, and then he turns his head, and he's kind of leaning and hunched when he's pulling on the rope. Well, turning his head, his eye line is not level at that moment. Also, it looks a little more interesting. If you're always keeping your figures perfectly level, eye line level, or you could even say keeping the camera always level, might get boring. Now I'm coming in with the heavier pencil, the darker pencil, and I'm refining the pencils enough that there's enough information to ink over. And you'll see I'm adjusting her pose some from where I had it previously. I've got her somewhat bracing herself on her right foot, but in a position where she's preparing to fall to her left with her other foot tucked in. And you can see that the rough pencils did not give me much to work with. There was not a clear position for the line of his chest and shoulders, the line of his head, and angle of his head, the angle of his twisting here. None of that was very well established. So I'm figuring that out with these pencils. So you'll notice that these are the final pencils, but they're still very messy. There's still a lot of finding of the basic structural shapes and whatnot, because it wasn't done that much in the prior pencils. Something I try to pay attention to, something I've had to learn to pay more attention to, is foreshortening, or the Z-axis, the depth from the camera. It is too easy to forget to do it. It's too easy to have things not getting foreshortened too much. Even with your figures, it's tempting because it's easier to draw perhaps if you keep things kind of flat, kind of more equidistant to the camera. For example, with her right foot here, when she's tucked and rolling, that could have been going straight down towards her butt, but that would have been flat to the camera. But I chose to do foreshortening on it and have you seeing the bottom of her foot, having it kind of turned. It takes a little more effort to draw, a little more care to get right. Her spear, it's shorter than it should be and it's coming towards the camera, and it's at an angle that kind of brings, maybe it's a line that kind of points your eye down to the next tier, the next 3 panels here. So yeah, trying to pay attention to foreshortening and to include it more than I otherwise might have. Okay, Kurok, his huge, muscular, wide back, and kind of trying to capture that sense of charging with his hands are like paws out in front of him, really trying to make sure he looks heavy. And you'll see I threw in the background, and I was able to squeeze in a little bit of Farah, having already rolled and kind of... And this is important too, because this is another little bitty piece of information that comes in handy. That tiny little stick figure of Farah just to the left of Kurok in this middle panel, of the lizard man in the middle panel. She had been bumped or something. She had rolled and turned in a well-established stance facing the lizard man, holding her spear. We would assume. That may not be clear in the drawing, but there's a sense of readiness in her pose, oriented towards Kurok. That's going to help in the next page when she engages in trying to get attack Kurok, it'll make sense. Like, she didn't just go from rolling on the ground to she's throwing her spear at him. You'll see this little hint of her progress towards that. It'll make sense when she does it. Another thing that I pay attention to, that I've noticed that I pay attention to, and I don't know if I've ever said it on this channel, but when you have a 1-point perspective, which is common for me, it's very common to have the figures and the background elements, in this case, the planks, the dock that they're on. It's very tempting to have everything pointing to that same vanishing point, and to even have your figures and everything oriented to the same vanishing point. For example, the cart that Sword is standing in, it doesn't have to be perfectly, parallel with the decking they're on. It doesn't have to point to the exact same vanishing point. At the same time, for design purposes, for energy and dynamic purposes, it's sometimes beneficial to have everything go back to the same vanishing point, and to position it intentionally, perhaps in the center, perhaps just behind the important figure. In this case, the vanishing point is very close to Sun. It's kind of at his shoulder or just below his head. That allows us to kind of draw energy, draw lines pointing to this point, so you don't miss him, because we don't want you to go from Sword and his word balloon straight to the next panel. Let's look down at him a little bit. So there's reasons to stick with everything going to the same vanishing point. At the same time, remembering to make things more organic. That's not how the world works. The cart doesn't always roll and face exactly parallel. And just like I was saying about the eye line, not always making it level, both Kurok and Sun in these two panels to the right are on a tilted axis, tilted in opposite directions rather equally. I also wanted, as you can see, Kurok he's completely filling the panel, making him seem more imposing. It's a bigger panel than Sun's panel, but the scale is equivalent, somewhat. The size of Sun's head compared to the size of Kurok's head, they're pretty accurate to scale. But because of the framing of it, Kurok he's completely filling the panel, seeming much bigger, more imposing. I wanted to capture Kurok's kind of gleam in the eye as he sees his victory just ahead of him, that he's going to get Sun. And I want you to see how terrified Sun is, how he would freeze in the face of this. Coming in with an 0.8 micron for the panel borders and the word balloon. These sound effect sort of sounds, I don't know what else to call it. They don't call for a word balloon, so I'm doing handwritten lettering for these things. And again, sort of a stylistic rule that I have decided on for this book is to not put sound effects of the sounds of impacts, percussive kinds of sounds, anything like that. I'm not using a word onomatopoeia for. I'm doing it for things, the sounds people are making, though. And when he's saying ra, or when I think he's saying ra here, and then he's huff, huff, huff. I'm writing those in, and they work better to not be in a word balloon. It's kind of nice as he's running in this second panel that the huff, huff, huff is trailing behind him. It almost implies each fast breath that he's left just behind in that particular spot. You could smell his breath at each of those points where the word is. There's fun things you can do with lettering like this. And I do a bit of it, like I said, for this book. You'll notice that I take the rough pencils that I have here, and then I'm redoing the outline of the figures. It's not tracing the pencils. I'm drawing them one more time with the ink pen, and then I'm coming back and adding the shading, adding the hatching lines, thickening lines where it might be useful to do so. Putting in the drop shadows and the cast shadows and so on. And these backgrounds, I mean, I don't know if there was any pencils back there. It's just I'm getting very loose and trusting with myself to just throw it into the background and to lighten my touch with the pen to let those lines be more expressive, sharper, and dynamic, but also much thinner than lines in the foreground to help create a sense of difference and depth. The depth is not simply indicated by line weight. It can be line quality also. You'll see sometimes I'm putting in the hatching as I go. This is a much bigger drawing, so I knew I didn't want to put my hand back over a spot that I had already put ink on. So I'm doing more of the left side first and coming back around. And again, the pencils are rough enough that you'll see that I'm kind of drawing with the pen. I can't just trace things. I have to find things. So I'm moving around, being careful with what I choose to ink first, because it's not easy to erase it. I have to white it out, and it's a pain, and kind of makes it worse for the finished drawing. So you'll see, like I started with the bottom of her foot. I started with her cloak, and certain muscle groups and areas on his body I hit first, because they're kind of my mile markers. They're points that I can lay down so I know that everything else will work. The safer choices to go first that need to be right or something. And with the shading, the hatching I'm adding in, I'm thinking about increased contrast, like both brighter and darker areas perhaps in the foreground. But his far arm, I've added more lines to. They cover a greater quantity of his left arm here, so that it appears darker, which will make it appear further from the camera to create depth there. The color between him and her will separate them quite a bit. But I'm thinking as I'm inking, how much do I need to add to separate her from him? You'll see that with Kurok, there's more hatching up in his upper body, but I was light with it around where he and her overlap, because I didn't want his heavy lines to clash or sort of flatten to take away the sense of depth from the lines on her. So he's lighter behind her, and I'm adding more on her to help her pop. These are decisions I'm making as I go. I make it up as I go. I go by feel, and I get better and better at it over time, obviously. And I haven't been doing it for that long. If you've been following along, I didn't do this in the last book, or even at the start of this book. Definitely more engaging and more fun, this style of inking. It's not simply mindlessly tracing. As I have demonstrated. It's a lot of choices and thinking along the way. Yeah, okay. I thought, if I remember from last week, I was talking about kind of doing things out of love, and the thought that struck me this week was about sacrifice, like making a sacrifice, almost like in the sense of to the gods, in almost kind of Old Testament biblical kind of way. It was the thought that with the amount of time I can apply to working on comics, with the direction I'm going, things I talked about in the last episode, and how I want to do things from that giving, joyful, loving place that's more free. That's how I want to be living and doing things, and I want more of my life to be like that. Well, one way of describing that is I want my life to be like a sacrifice, that it's given out of love. In that sense, it's the excess, like the tithe or the excess, the burnt offering that you would offer up to God. It's not your daily work and grind. It is, the fruits of your labor, taking the best of it and offering it up. And that is that feels more like, it's very organizing for me. It's very helpful for me to think of it that way. That when I sit down to draw, I want it to be that I've been living my life. I've been taking care of the things I need to do. I've been putting in the work to grow the crops, metaphorically. And this is offering up the excess, right? Offering up the gift. And so I get to sit down and draw. I get to sit down and offer that up. And that means it can't be the labor, it's the sacrifice instead. So it makes sense that I want to sit down and draw and not do it for long. Let's say, if I think about it, ideally I would sit down and completely give myself to drawing for 1 hour and then get up and be done for the entire day. And ideally, I think that's something that I would do almost every day, instead of sitting down to draw a page once or twice a week and doing the whole page, and doing them in such a way right now where it takes 3 to 4.5 hours to do, and sometimes in 2 pieces. And I'm okay with keeping it being in pieces. It could be penciling one day, inking the other. But yeah, ideally I picture it being that perfect amount of time that feels good to sit and do it, and done in that particular way. So again, we'll see how my art style changes as I try to move in the direction that feels right to me as a person and my soul or whatever. And it's what feels right to me that will affect the outcome of the art that I do, the style of it. We can't separate the art from the artist. Or I definitely don't want to. I definitely don't want to do that, and don't think it's a good thing. So I'll be moving that direction. We'll see what that means, like, and what it ends up looking like. But it might mean adjusting my style a bit to where the pages can be done in almost half the time, really. in the same spirit and in a more consistent and even more so in the spirit that I've been trying to do them in now. Yeah. Maybe I'll say more about that next time. At the moment, I'm a little tired. I had some technical difficulties, and it's getting a little late before I could get this video done. So maybe that's it, that I'm just kind of running on empty and don't have much to say. But I wanted to at least get the idea out there that I'm thinking about and working with here. This adjustment to the way I approach doing my art. And kind of the feeling that I have, the kind of mood that I have, energy that I bring when I sit down to draw. And it's going to involve, coming up with expressions for characters on the page, kind of like I do there in that panel with Sun's face, a pretty... there's little details and expressiveness in it that I'm finding in the inks. They aren't all pre-planned. I'm just finding it and creating it and feeling my way to it. We're going to see more of that and probably a continual reduction in the reference and design of the environments. Things like that will probably be continue to be done in this faster way that we're getting to later in this book versus maybe earlier in this one or the last one. Because I think the realm of adding expressiveness and is going to come often in faces. Now, it happens in environments too. I put little feeling into the cart and stuff, and this is all just made up. And sometimes a little bit into the rope. It's not everything's taken for granted, but some of it will be. Maybe 20% of the panel will be something that has extra attention given to add meaning to it, to add some richness, expressiveness to it, even if it is the rope. On the next page, I think there's a close-up of the rope, or maybe it's a few more pages, but there's a close-up of the rope, and and then I add a lot more expressiveness into it. So it's just the smaller things in the panel, and the majority of the panel are going to be simpler. For sure. So I think the path I'm on will involve more expressiveness, even more detail in some ways, but only in a smaller number of elements per panel. A greater dynamics between high and low detail, high and low information. And that kind of sounds like an element of mastery in itself, to be able to have that higher range. The white paint pen here is helping me clean up some of my less quality choices here in the inks, or little mistakes where I overlapped the line. And so that's what that is. It's a brush tip with actual brush bristles on it, but it's refillable and it's filled with opaque white paint. It's like basically white out. Yeah, so making the pages is a little sacrifice. Making these videos is. That's why I always say I put the video together. It doesn't take very long to do it. and I sit down and I watch the video while I record the voiceover. And when I'm at my best, I am making it up as I go. I am in a particular mood and headspace, mental space, where I'm ready to, give what I have. And it becomes a piece of the art. It becomes a piece of my purpose, what I'm offering up, what I'm improving in. This is an art form itself, just making the videos and keeping the vlog going. And I get to express myself and learn from this too. So I'm trying to move this even more so towards that way of expressing. So that might mean that I slightly adjust even the way that I set up the videos and record the intro and everything to be more spontaneous, more of an offering. It's a ritual. I sit down, I do this, so that it fits my life, and more of my life will become like that as I learn how to give everything. That's the journey, I think. So that's it for this week. I hope you liked the page. There's some fun stuff there. I'll see you next week.